Well, I just went for my run, took a shower, and now I've got some Gatorade I'm sipping, so that'll be good.
Gatorade.
Yeah, I just ran. Like I just had my daily jog.
Oh no, I just haven't heard Gatorade for a while. Um,
Mm.
probably am not. Hmm, I don't know many people that are, I guess, living good, healthy lifestyles. Let's see. I'll send out an announcement. We'll get people rolling in here. All right. So before we do get started here, I'm curious. I was trying to look it up, and I was a little bit confused. You're affiliated with RT, Russia Today, right?
I'm a reporter for them in New York City. Yes, that's my job.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what. Yeah, I had heard a few things. Like, some people said like, "Oh, he's a reporter on it," and some people said, "Oh, yeah, he's a guest on it." I was just
I
didn't
used
know
to
if you were
be
a
a
frequent guest.
guest, like an analyst. That's how I started out with them for like 5, 6 years before they hired me. I was an analyst. And I worked for Press TV, which is the Iranian TV network in English. I worked for them for years before that, for like 3 years before I got hired by RT. So yeah, but yeah, I'm an RT reporter. I do news packages for them in New York City and around the world. I've traveled to Russia for them. I've traveled to Oakland, California. I go to DC a lot. I travel around the country. So yeah, I do news broadcasts.
Um, so it sounds like oh, you might want to go to. Are you hearing the popping sound as people join?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Easy way to fix that. If you are you on mobile or desktop?
Desktop.
Okay. So in the bottom left, by your username, there's a little cogwheel. If you
Yeah.
click that, and then you scroll down near the bottom, there's a streamer mode.
Yeah.
And then in the top there, if you just toggle, there's a little switch there, toggle enable streamer mode. That will prevent those noises from popping up.
Okay. Very good. Did that. All right. That should be fixed.
All right. But yeah, I'm actually really curious. I looked you up a bit before this, trying to get to know you. And I somehow completely missed a bit about Iran. Have you actually been to Iran?
A number of times. Yes.
Okay. I have not actually talked to anyone that's been to this place, and it's like the number one place I want to go. Have you
Well,
been to Persepolis?
not only have I been to Iran, but I spoke at some anti-Israel conferences in Iran as a
Mhm.
guest. And then in 2015, when the bombing of Yemen by Saudi Arabia started, I joined with the Iranian wing of the Red Crescent Society, and I went on a ship from Iran to try and get to Yemen to deliver medical aid, and with a bunch of Iranian doctors. And we actually weren't able to finish our mission because the ship was bombed. The port that we were arriving at was bombed on the day we were supposed to arrive 8 times, 8 different airstrikes against the port. So we had to end up turning the ship around and going to Djibouti. And so we went back from Djibouti back to Iran. So yeah, uh, and I spent 13 days on a ship with barely anyone who spoke English. About 4 or 5 English speakers on the ship. We talked about nothing but Shiite Islam the entire time. So it was quite an experience. I feel like, I know Iran in a way that many Americans do not. And I made a documentary about my time in Iran that was shown on Iranian TV. It was called Iranian Dream. They took me to see the Ayatollah, the supreme leader. So I actually got to experience what it's like to be the only American in an auditorium of 20,000 people who were chanting death to America. So that's quite an experience. Yeah, but I also got to spend some time in like northern Tehran, where the rich people who love America and they have like fake McDonald's and stuff like that. Um, and I got to go to different cities: Mashhad, Isfahan, Bandar Abbas is the port city that we left on the ship from. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Iran. The Iranians know me well. So yeah.
I was in the Navy, and we did anti-piracy operations off the eastern coast of Africa. And we were all pretty young and immature, and couldn't stop making jokes about the name Djibouti.
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing when I was in Djibouti, I remember, they wouldn't let the Iranians get off the ship because Djibouti, they don't grant visas to Iranians. But they let me get off the ship because I was an American, and they let this French citizen who was on the ship also get off. So we went to this hotel. It was the only hotel where you could buy plane tickets in cash, and that's how we like flew back to Iran. And at the hotel, it was the hotel that the U.S. embassy is like inside of. Okay, and I remember in the hotel there were all these guys from West Virginia who were like in like army fatigues. They were like Blackwater contractors. The hotel in Djibouti was just full of West Virginia guys who were like truck drivers and military guys who are now contractors in Djibouti. There's a lot of U.S. military presence there, and it was weird because I'd been on this ship full of people from Iran, and I'd been in the Middle East and all of this, and all of a sudden I'm in a hotel hearing people who talk like they're from West Virginia. That was quite an experience. I'm eating at the breakfast buffet, and I'm like, oh my god, am I like back home in Ohio or something? Like, what is this? It was weird. So it was an experience.
Oh, sorry, man. But so obviously most of the questions here I'll read off from users. But one of the cool things here is, we talk to people like you. I do get to ask a few of my own, and oddly enough, I'm sure this is not what you usually get, but the most pressing thing on my mind is, have you been to Persepolis?
No, I didn't get to do that. That's more of a tourist kind of thing. I didn't get to do much tourist stuff when I was in Iran. I spoke to a lot of university students. They flew me around the country to speak to university students. I attended like anti-Zionist, anti-Israel conferences, but I didn't really get a chance to do that. They told me if I return, that will be one of the things on the list is they'll take me to Persepolis. So that's a really big tourist site there. I know that. I did get to see some ancient churches though. Some of the old churches that are in Iran that are very beautiful. They have some very very old churches with beautiful artwork. And I got to actually attend church in Iran. I attended Armenian Christian church on Sunday morning. They knew I was a Christian, so they would make sure to my guides would take me to church. And they have the Armenian Christian church in Tehran. It's got a big fence around it, and inside women don't have to wear a headscarf, and they drink communion wine. And like all the religious rules don't apply inside the church, which I think is pretty neat. So yeah, I mean, and there's a vibrant Armenian Christian community in Iran. In Iran, they don't allow any religion that supports Israel, though. So like you'll hear about Christians being persecuted in Iran, but usually that's like evangelical, like Baptist kind of people. They don't allow that because they're pro-Israel. So, but Armenian Christians, and a lot of them are very, very strong supporters of the Islamic Republic, which is interesting.
Sorry, you've heard that noise. My dog's going crazy. Hey.
Sure. Yeah, but I mean, are we going now or?
Yeah, sorry, man. For anyone that's not familiar, we've got Caleb Maupin on. He's a reporter for Russia Today. As I have heard, you are a socialist. You've been termed a communist as well. Do you accept either or both of those labels?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I tell people my ideology is 21st century socialism, but I think the Soviet Union's part of my heritage. I look up to China. I look up to Cuba and other countries that have Marxist-Leninist parties leading them. So yeah, sure. Socialist, communist, whatever.
One of the big things I remember hearing that stuck out, I want to make sure first that this is an accurate quote, but it was that you believe in socialism with American characteristics. Is that right?
Yes, actually. In China, they call the system there, they call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And one thing that I discovered after spending a long time, I was part of Occupy Wall Street. I was arrested during Occupy Wall Street protests. And, I was in, some Marxist Leninist groups here in the United States and spent a lot of time trying to navigate those groups. But one thing that I realized after traveling to Venezuela, after traveling to Brazil, to Ecuador, to going to Iran and spending some time and trying to figure out what was going on in the 21st century, I realized that socialism in every country is unique. It's never a copy, and that we're never going to have Soviet style socialism in the United States. We're never going to have Chinese socialism in the United States. We're never going to have socialism like they have in Cuba or socialism like Venezuela. Everywhere socialism is implemented, it is uniquely applied to the conditions of the country. and that the only way we're really going to have socialism in the United States is if it comes out of the progressive traditions that are already here. There was a strong movement in this country to abolish slavery. There was a history of civil rights organizing and opposing racism. There's the labor movement. There's the suffragists who fought for women's rights. There's the LGBT community and their struggle for recognition. There is a progressive tradition in American history. And socialism, when it comes to the United States, will come out of that progressive tradition. It will not be a foreign import. It won't be the USA adopting a foreign ideology. It will be that progressivism, that optimism, that hope that you can find in, like, if you look at the life of John Brown, for example, if you look at some of our great communist leaders like Eugene Debs, Gus Hall, William Z. Foster, you look at the Black Panthers, Huey Newton, it will be that tendency in American history taking power. So I use the phrase socialism with American characteristics to make that point, right? It's obviously, that's not a very good brand name because we all know about socialism with Chinese characteristics. But people have talked about American socialism, and we need to figure out the kind of socialism that will work in this country. Like, in the Middle East, the Marxist-Leninist stuff wasn't going to work. Ba'athist Arab socialism was very, very successful among the Arab people. Michel Aflaq, he understood that the Arab people, with their history and their traditions, they were not going to adopt Marxism, Leninism. So he developed Ba'athist Arab socialism. In Venezuela, they have Bolivarian socialism, right? There are different types of socialism around the world. Chinese socialism is not a copy of Soviet socialism by any means. Mao Zedong thought, and now Deng Xiaoping theory is very unique. So we need to figure out what we can learn from all these countries around the world that have attempted to build socialism, but also how we will do it here in our unique circumstances. I guess that's a long-winded answer, but I hope it's helpful.
So I'm kind of curious, like, what, when you say American characteristics, what are the kind of characteristics, like, I guess, like, the main things that stick out to you that would separate us from other socialisms as you would have us be?
Well, I think that here in the United States, we are really an entrepreneurial people. We are a people that believes in get it done. We want to work hard. We want to get rich. We want to achieve things. We want to accomplish things. And that in a lot of ways, that go get 'em American initiative, people call it the American motor mindedness, people associate it with us. We are a hardworking people here in the United States. And that has become, useful to advocates of economic neoliberalism. That's been translated into this free market thing, right? Well, if somebody's poor, or if somebody doesn't have health care, education, well, they just haven't worked hard enough. So don't have any empathy or concern for them, right? We should let the roads crumble and let our infrastructure fall apart because, if people need things, they can just take care of themselves. Neoliberal free market ideology has kind of hijacked that American go get 'em hard work spirit. But I think, though, if you look at the Soviet Union, when Stalin was industrializing the Soviet Union, you see that very same spirit. If you read the writings of Anna Louise Strong, for example, a great American journalist who lived in the Soviet Union, she talks about how it was the same spirit. She said the Soviet Union is the new America. Here, people are working hard. They're taking a deeply impoverished country and building it up into an industrial superpower. They're wiping out illiteracy. They're working really, really hard, but it's not about working really, really hard at the expense of someone else. It's about building up all of society. It's about, a human family cooperating to raise up all. They say a rising tide raises all boats. And I think that socialism in the United States, it won't be a pessimistic socialism. It won't be a socialism that's just kind of like, oh, screw it, give me some free healthcare, give me some jobs. It'll be about how can we come together to unleash the potential of every individual, and put them to work to build a good society for all. And how can we maximize the individual's potential to the benefit of the entire community? I think we'll have a market sector in American socialism. I think the idea that in the United States we would have government-run restaurants or government-run hotels would be a nightmare, and I don't think the American people would ever accept that. On top of that, we really believe in free speech and individual rights here in the United States, right? Not that other countries don't. I think most socialist countries would prefer to have more free speech and more freedom of assembly. They're just in unique circumstances. But I can guarantee you that socialism in the United States would never be implemented without guaranteeing the right to freedom of speech, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to freedom of religion. But I'm just speculating. It ultimately wouldn't be up to me, right? It's going to take a mass movement of millions of people to build socialism in the United States. And it's going to be those people in their millions brought into the political process, actively transforming society, pushing profits out of command and putting popular will in charge of the economy. That's what's going to transform things. And that's why I'm really excited to do this. I don't know who all of you are on this live. I don't think I've met a lot of you. But I never turn down an opportunity to talk about socialism to a group of people that I don't know, because I could very well be talking to the next Lenin. The next Lenin could be on this chat right now. I think the next Che Guevara, the next Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. could be listening right now. If I have the opportunity to point somebody who can make great achievements towards socialism, if I can point them in the right direction, that's something that I would not want to turn down the opportunity to do. I believe in us, right? There's so much pessimism in our time. There's so much of an effort to try and tell people, you can't do anything. The future is hopeless. We've got austerity and pessimism coming from the centers of big money right now, right? On the one hand, you've got the free market libertarian approach, cut social spending. The market is the answer. Capitalism and profits will solve everything, and individualism above all else. That's coming from the right. And then you've got more of a controlled, careful, pessimistic Malthusianism coming from the left. This idea that, well, there's too many people in the world. We're all consuming too much, and we gradually just need to transition to a lower consumption society. We need to manage people kind of like they're animals. Give people, flashy cell phones to look at, give them pornography, but just kind of transition everyone to a greater state of poverty. I think we can do better as a human race, as a country. I think we can get to a better society. I believe in the future. I believe in the human race. I don't believe human beings are animals. Frederick Engels, the Marxist writer, close associate of Karl Marx, he said that there's a big distinct difference between human beings and animals, which is that animals can only interact with their environment, but human beings are the only species with the ability to make the environment serve them. And we have a big problem because the way we've been making the environment serve us lately has not been very rational and well thought out, right? We have a whole bunch of different, corporations doing whatever they want and thinking about their short-term profits, and they're not using resources in a rational way. It's contributing to problems like climate change. But I think with socialism and with a centrally planned economy, we could use and control our environment in a rational way. We could get to higher fuel sources, get beyond fossil fuels, get to something not windmills and solar panels, but something much, much more efficient, a higher energy source like nuclear fusion, cold fusion. We could start going into outer space more. We could start, they talk about mining asteroids. We talk about, getting natural resources from the moon like helium-3. I think the human race is full of potential. We are a creative species. We have the ability to invent, and that this pessimism in our age is very, very scary to me. And it's also, I mean, and this may sound right wing, it's also un-American, right? I mean, if there's anything about the United States, it's a country that believes in innovation. It believes in the hope for a greater tomorrow. That's why rags to riches kind of stories are so popular in this country, which is, again, very right wing and feeds into the free market logic. But again, it speaks to us as a people. We are a people who believes in human progress. And there is a big effort in these hard economic times to try and erode that, to make us pessimistic, to make us cynical. But I don't think that's who we are as a people. And I think that, the human race desperately needs optimistic thinking in our time. And that socialism points the way out of the hopelessness of a system based on profits and selfishness and irrationality.
So I'm gonna stop asking my own questions here. Make sure we get to the users' questions. We normally do these for about 2 hours. Does that work for you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So for those guys in the chat, you can use the Caleb Maupin questions channel if you want to ask a question, and if you want to chat, comment, use the Caleb Maupin discussion. I don't know if you care to, but a lot of guests follow the discussion, kind of see what people are saying, and oftentimes we'll jump in and say, "No, user, you're wrong." So let's see. First question I want to get to is from Sebastian. He wants to know if you could build a memorial for one American, who would it be?
It would be William Z. Foster. William Z. Foster was the man who did more than anything else to create that American dream middle class. In 1919, he led the major strike of steel workers all across the United States that was brutally crushed, but it shut the country down. It was a huge, huge gathering. He eventually joined the Communist Party. He led the unemployment councils, which were people that were desperate and poor and hungry, and stormed into government buildings chanting "Work or wages now," and forced the Roosevelt administration to eventually hire the unemployed into the Works Progress Administration. He built an anti-fascist popular front, very, very hard to make sure that the United States was not an ally of Nazi Germany and Hitler, but was on the right side of the Second World War. During the 1950s, he was put on trial and suffered greatly during McCarthyism. And then even in his final years, he called out the Soviet Union for their mistreatment of China. And on his last 80th birthday, he turned 80 years old in the Soviet Union. Khrushchev came to visit him in the hospital bed, and he called out Khrushchev for the way the Soviet Union was mistreating China. So William Z. Foster was by far, just an amazing person, a great contribution to the struggle of African Americans for civil rights. Any of us who enjoyed, a comfortable life, if you have a family member who's a steel worker or an auto worker or a textile worker or a meat packing worker, he organized the meat packing workers in Chicago. If you in any way benefited from the prosperous middle class that existed in the United States, you owe something to William Z. Foster. And he was an American. He loved the United States of America, but he was friendly to the Soviet Union too. And he saw that socialism was the way of the future. His writing is brilliant. He wrote, not only did he write kind of agitational pamphlets explaining socialism, he also wrote 5 history books. He wrote the history of the Communist Party of the United States, the history of the World Trade Union movement, the history of the 3 internationals, the history of African Americans in the United States, the history of the outline political histories of the Americas, which is a history of North and South America. Prolific writer, amazing speaker, amazing organizer. William Z. Foster is probably the person I look up to the most, more than anybody. And he was the face of American communism. He suffered a lot, and he gave his life, and and he's unknown. People don't know the name. He should be a household name, in my opinion. I would build a monument to William Z. Foster by far.
All right. And I just feel the need to ask, because you brought up McCarthyism. Are you familiar with the Venona intercepts?
The Venona cables. It's a thing that the right wing points to a lot to say that McCarthyism was somehow justified. I'm aware of that. Yeah, it's. I don't think that proves that somehow the activities during that time were okay. You should talk to some old communists sometime, or maybe a lot of them are dead, but those were really dark years. It was a crime to be a member of the Communist Party. You could be thrown in prison for it. I heard stories about at the library during the McCarthy era in a lot of major cities. They would keep all the Marxist books behind the counter at the library. In order to check them out, you had to show your ID, and they'd write your name down and give it to the FBI. Maybe that night the FBI would come to your house a week or two later and say, "Why were you looking at those Marxist books? Are you a subversive? Are you tied to subversive organizations?" Those were not good times at all. McCarthyism was particularly dark. A lot of people don't know that in 1951, they passed the McCarran Internal Security Act. It's funny because the Alex Jones and people like that talk about it now. You get some like crazy folks that'll talk about it from the Tea Party and stuff. But if you read the McCarran Internal Security Act of 1951, it declares basically a list of Americans. It gives the Justice Department the ability to create a list of Americans who would be put in concentration camps if a national emergency were declared. Read about it. Now, it's been overturned by the courts, obviously, but they were prepared if there were some kind of crisis to round up communists and socialists in the United States and put them in prison camps. Right? We were prepared to do things that remind everyone of Nazi Germany. So, McCarthyism was not a good time. It was a booming economy in the United States for sure. And on top of that, around the world, it was, coming out of the Second World War, the communists had been anti-fascist fighters, right? In Italy, in France, and all kinds of European countries, the Communist Party was surging because they were the anti-fascist fighters, number one. In China, they had come to power in 1949. You had in the Korean Peninsula, where the Korean War happened, and the United States was handed a humiliating defeat. And You had the civil rights movement getting going because the Soviet Union had been an ally and friend of African Americans for so long. And and the United States basically was seeing the Soviet Union humiliated around the world. There was the incident with Emmett Till, a young African American man who was lynched. Um, and the photograph of his mutilated body, the Soviet Union sent that photograph all over the world and said, "This is the USA. They say they believe in democracy. Look what they do to African Americans." And that forced the United States to start addressing the issue of Jim Crow segregation. So I mean, in around the world, the 1950s was a time of great optimism. But McCarthyism in the United States, it was a lot like the Spanish Inquisition. While all over Europe you had the Reformation, and people questioning the Catholic Church. In Spain, which was a stronghold of the Catholic Church, you had this brutal repressive crackdown. Well, in the 1950s, all over the world, socialism was on the rise. People in the colonized countries were breaking their chains. You had all this rebellion and progress around the world. So in the United States, which was a stronghold of capitalism, you had this crackdown. It was a lot like the Spanish Inquisition. That's what I think of McCarthyism.
So our next question is from Seesaw. He wants to know, should public transport be free? And to, I guess, color the question, he wants to point out that people praise China for its high-speed rail network. However, it's not accessible for a lot of the population, and many have to take slower, crowded trains, while the higher speed trains seem sparsely filled.
Well, I think the ideal would be sure. I mean, that public transportation should be free, and I'm sure that China would like to get to the point where it can provide free transit, to all of the population in high speed trains. But I don't know if they're there yet. I mean, they're still a middle income country. But ideally, yes. I mean, the vision. We're thinking long term here, right? Ideally, the goal is not only a society where there's full employment, where everyone has what they need, where we have a planned economy. The vision is even higher than that. I mean, Marxists and socialists are striving for that ultimate ideal of communism, of a stateless, classless world based on so much material abundance that people can kind of just do what they want to do and take what they need or take what they want. But that's based on such a high level of technology advancing, such a high level of abundance, such little human labor being required. Um, China used to be the sick man of Asia, one of the poorest countries in the world. Today, it's the second largest economy in the world. I mean, it's raised 800 million people out of poverty, but it's on a road, right? Just like all the socialist countries, just like the whole world, right? There's no set ideal, but yeah, I mean, public transportation in this country is a national embarrassment. I'm in New York City, which is the capital of capitalism, right? Wall Street is here. I mean, you should see our subways here, right? They smell like urine. They break down. They're a mess, right? Compare the subways of New York City, right? They, that are the best in any city in the United States. I mean, they're far better than D.C., far better than Cleveland. But at the same time, they're a disaster. Students from China, students from Russia, students from Denmark and Sweden, students from Britain come here, and they can't believe how bad our public transportation is. Why is it so bad? Well, because it's collective, it's public property, but it's not really public property. That's even the funniest thing. A lot of people don't know that here in the United States, the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, is not public. It's actually what you call a public beneficent corporation, meaning it's a private company run for profit, that has kind of a state monopoly. It's been privatized essentially, and it's a ripoff. And the MTA board is people tied in with big banks who kind of ripped off the public. We get awful service. Banks make money off of it. The taxpayer gets ripped off. We get ripped off when we pay for it. Yeah, look at our public transportation system in the United States. It's deeply, deeply embarrassing. It feeds into the car culture where everyone has to have their individual car, and that's great for big oil companies. It also feeds into this individualism and free market. But yeah, I mean, public transportation is a very, very good thing, and China has done a great job building it around the world. Maybe they could do a better job, increasing their population's access to it. That seems to be what the person asking the question was alluding to. Maybe they're right. There's plenty to criticize. I don't believe in blind apologism for anybody. There's always room to criticize.
All right. Next question is from The Legit Runner. He asks, if I said the cornerstone of capitalism is free labor, how far would you agree or disagree?
So the question is, He said the cornerstone of capitalism is free labor. How far would you agree or disagree?
Correct.
I'm trying to think exactly what he's getting at there. I mean, it's interesting. The phrase free labor brings to mind the Republican Party. You know, when the Republican Party began, its slogan
Hmm.
was free land, free labor, free men. And free labor meaning not slave labor, right? Like it was an opposition to slavery. Well, I mean, in the United States, right, we have, you know, your ability to work, right? You have a contract with your employer. You can quit your job at any time. A lot of socialist countries they have that too, though. You know, I mean, people there's a private sector, there's a market sector. You know, and I think you know, I mean, under feudalism, you started to see some of that even as well, right? I mean, you still had you know the feudal, you know, the serfs and the landlords, but there started to be more of a layer of people tied in with the mercantile classes and the traders who were starting to you know go from employer to employer. So I don't think that's the essence of what capitalism is, but I can see why you might identify capitalism with the free agent laborer. I can kind of see what they're getting at, but I don't think that's the essence of capitalism. I don't think it's the cornerstone of capitalism, but it's part of capitalism. I can see that.
Our next question here. So, have you heard of Vosh? I mean, I know you have. So you know, we had him on recently for a debate about feminism, and CEO of communism wants to know if you could talk about your recent disagreement or argument with Vosh.
Sure. It's quite simple. Vosh says that quote unquote tankies, right? And I don't know if everyone's here is part of the little leftist enclave where everyone knows these terms, but a slur. If you're a socialist or a communist or an anarchist in the United States, the understanding is you can do that. You can believe in those ideas. You just have to denounce every country that's ever built socialism, right? I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, you can say you're a socialist. Don't defend the Soviet Union. Don't defend Cuba. Don't defend Vietnam. Don't defend, you know, China. You, as long as you denounce every country that's ever built socialism, you just think socialism is a nice idea. It's acceptable. Well, you know, those of us who don't go along with that, those of us who say, well, there is something we can learn from the Soviet Union or from China or from Vietnam, those of us who say that, they call us tankies. That's the slur, tankies, right? And Vosh is in the habit of routinely claiming that tankies are the same as fascists, as the same as Nazis, the same as you know Ku Klux Klan kind of people, that we're the exact same thing, and that is beyond offensive to me because it was tankies who built the civil rights movement in the United States, right? If you look at it, before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a household name, you had Henry Winston, you had William L. Patterson, you had the Communist Party who wrote "We Charge Genocide," an official petition to the United Nations exposing racism. You had the Scottsboro case where the Communist Party, you know, exposed this racist frame up of young African American men in the South. You know, to equate communists with the Ku Klux Klan, with neo Nazis, with white supremacists is beyond offensive. It's unbelievably offensive, right? But it goes into what you're supposed to believe at American universities, right? There's this horseshoe theory where the far left and the far right are the same, and there's this great American center, and that's the great American way. And if you become too far left, you're a communist. If you become too far right, you're a Nazi. And they're all basically the same because they reject American liberalism and individualism. That's what he's feeding into, and it's really, really offensive. And I tweeted at him pictures of some tankies, right? W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the most well loved African American scholars, was a great admirer of Mao Zedong, met with Mao Zedong a number of times. He was a great admirer of Stalin. You should read his autobiography where he praises the Soviet Union. The Black Panther Party, waving Mao's little red book, which they frequently did. They read Mao, they studied Mao, they admired China, they admired North Korea. You know, I mean, Albert Einstein wrote glowing things about the Soviet Union. You know, tankies, right, i.e., communists who recognize existing socialist countries, have done amazing things to struggle against racism. And to equate them with Nazis is beyond offensive. And it bothers me that this individual who thinks that the Black Panthers were the same as the neo Nazis, that thinks that the Communist Party USA that fought for the Scottsboro Nine and against Jim Crow segregation in the 1920s and 30s is somehow the same as the German American Bund or the alt right of today. The fact that he has such a big audience to spew that kind of garbage is very disturbing to me, right? And again, I mean, I wrote a book called City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, which I recommend people should check it out. And in there, I talk about the synthetic left. And if you look at it, you read about, Google it. The Congress for Cultural Freedom. This was a CIA program in the 1950s where they started funding leftists who were anti-Soviet. And it started out as just kind of a CIA operation. They were funding Trotskyites. They were funding, intellectuals who were calling themselves socialists and communists, but were pushing CIA propaganda against the socialist countries. And what began as just kind of a disinformation operation, they funded a magazine called Partisan Review. It began changing the entire course of left-wing politics. Leftist politics, what it means to be a leftist or a socialist in the United States, has changed drastically because of CIA manipulation of the American universities, of left-wing politics, of covert funding, and that's a rabbit hole. There's a lot there, and I'm actually doing a lot of research about it. I've got another project in the works exposing that. But part of a lot of the, if you look at a lot of these outfits that were funded by the CIA in the 1950s, like Partisan Review, like the Frankfurt School in Germany, equating Soviet communists and equating Communist Party USA members and people who admired Mao in China, equating them with Nazis is a big part of that operation. So I find that particularly disturbing that he would make such comments.
All right, so the user Simon, who asked this question, wants to say thanks for your answer. He appreciates it, and he wants to know, what do you think is the best way to, I guess, kind of bridge the gap or unite these different sides?
Well, I would like to have a debate with Vosh, with a moderator where we both got a chance to speak. He says, "Oh, I can call into his program and he'll shout me down, interrupt me, and insult me." But no, I mean, I would be for having a real debate where he gets equal time with me, a moderator, make sure no one's interrupting anybody else. I would love to engage with him. And the thing is, I don't, most of what he says, criticizing capitalism, criticizing the alt-right, opposing racism, for the rights of women, for the rights of LGBT people, I don't have a problem with any of that. I agree with most of it. And I think his audience are great people. And I think he's a great guy who has good intentions, but he admits himself he's not very educated on these kind of things. He's very new to all of this. So I think rather than calling people fascists and Nazis, he should engage with tankies. He should engage with us and see what, maybe we know something he doesn't know. Maybe we have some good points to make,
All right. So next question is from DMMRX, left arrow 80105, right arrow star. I think it's important to know. They want to know, what would be your message to someone who considers themselves conservative?
Well, in a way, I think communists and Marxists are the most conservative people you've ever met, right? We believe that people shouldn't have instability in their lives. They shouldn't be afraid of not having a job, not having health care. People should be able to have a family and take care of that family and always know that their kids will have food and that they'll have housing. Communists want stability in society. They want the economy to not be irrational and just whatever's profitable, but they want it to be organized to serve public good. And a big part of conservatism is a belief that the individual has an obligation to society, not just that the society has an obligation to individuals, right? People should be able to have jobs and education and healthcare, but also that people have a responsibility to the society, that people should get educated so they can go out and build a better country. And that, that's a big part of conservatism. That John F. Kennedy, he wasn't a conservative by any means, he was a liberal, but he said, don't ask what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And old style conservatives liked that, right? It was Ayn Rand. It was William F. Buckley. People like in what the new right, the neocons, they didn't approve of that. But old style conservatives heard John F. Kennedy say that, and they said that's great. And that there are a lot of conservative values in socialism, right? I mean, the idea that we should have a community in the country, that we should feel an obligation to each other in our neighborhoods and our families and all of that. That's deeply conservative. I think it's also very communist. So I hope that answers the question.
All right. Our next question comes from Tripod. I'm sorry. Actually, we've got one we're doing ahead of that. 1 second, Tripod. Rap Manaj is next. Rap Manaj, are you there?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, hey, Caleb. Thanks for doing this. So I've been following you from about 2006, and so I'm wondering, from your time at Baldwin College to your time with Adam Glantz and Cleveland Fist to the present, what are the major lessons you have learned? What are a few of your greatest achievements and greatest setbacks, and how have you kept yourself grounded when you've achieved your success? And how have you picking yourself up after a setback?
Wow. Okay. Um, well, it's fun that you're asking about when I was in Cleveland. When I was in Cleveland, I was an activist. I remember I was involved in there was a walkout at a high school in Cleveland, and I heard about it on Facebook. And me and my roommate, we actually went to go to the walkout, and the police beat up two young African American women who had been protesting. And I filmed it with my camera, and one of them was acquitted in juvenile court because they'd charged her with assaulting the police, but my video proved that that was not the case. The police had assaulted her. And I was involved in some struggles there. And yeah, I mean, I was in college. I didn't particularly like college, honestly. If I could do it again, I would go to a different school someplace. But I was part of Occupy Wall Street. And I guess if I've learned anything, and I spent a lot of time in Iran, and I've been to Russia, and I've traveled Latin America extensively, and, spent a long time, trying to build some of the Marxist groups here in the United States. If I've learned anything, it's that, the world is constantly changing, and that most people around the world are good. And I think that people lose sight of that. But I think most people in the world are good. They want to take care of their family. They want to help other people. They have compassion. They have a desire to do kindness, and that most people are motivated by goodness. And that if we, as socialists and Marxists, want to try and build socialism, we need to appeal to the goodness in people, and we need to not appeal to people's jealousy. We need to not appeal to people's desire for revenge or chaos. We need to not appeal to people's anger and their rage, but we instead need to appeal to the goodness in people. That's my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. I talk about what I call the city building tendency, and I go back to Athens, and I talk about Socrates. I talk about Confucius. I talk about Julius Caesar and his efforts to try and reform the Roman Empire, and that socialism is the constructive side of the human race. And that one of the things that disturbs me is I feel like the left, in a lot of cases, does try to appeal to negative emotions, to negative, destructive impulses that people have. And I think that's a mistake. And I think that's what I've learned over the course of those years. Thanks for asking.
Yep, no, thank you. I did see, like, I think it's your 2006, 2007 debate at Baldwin with, I think it was like a debate with a capitalist, and
Hmm.
that was sort of the first events I ever saw of you.
Well, it was fun. I'll tell you, on my campus, we would have I was always trying to arrange different socialist events with different socialist speakers. No event ever got that big of an attendance as that event. When a guy who was ahead of his fraternity, I'd been writing articles for the campus newspaper, about socialism. And so this guy who was in a fraternity, he started writing articles to rebut my articles. And so I went to him. His name was Tim Davey. I said, "Hey, why don't we have like a debate on the campus?" And it was packed. I mean, that room, it was like standing room only, right? I mean, not only people from the college, people from the community, the local John Birch Society, like far right group, brought like five of their members to sit there and take notes, and local communists. I mean, it was like the biggest event we had ever done at the college. And it was a great event, I thought. But what was interesting is right after that event, the college newspaper called me up, and they said, "Hey, and there was a donor to the college who threatened to stop donating to the college if you're allowed to continue writing for the newspaper. So we have to ban you from the college paper." And that was kind of a big moment for me, because when I'd been writing all these like kind of crazy articles and not having an impact, there was no need to ban me. It's just kind of, okay, he's a confused kid. But after we had that event, and that event was powerful. I mean, that was a long time ago. I mean, I feel like I'm a much better speaker now, but I feel like I did a decent job, and there was a big crowd there, and people were kind of not expecting me to be as articulate as I was. And after that, there was a need to just shut this down. I thought that was amusing that I was essentially banned from the campus newspaper because I had a successful debate.
It's kind of funny how that works.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying it's kind of funny how that works. But our next question is another VC question from Tripod. Tripod, are you ready? Okay. Well, if he's not ready, we can go on to our next one here then. Sorry. Golden Sentinel wants to know, how have you been doing with coronavirus?
Well, it's been frustrating for me. I'm a go get 'em kind of guy. April 18th, I was supposed to have the launch conference for my think tank I'm forming called the Center for Political Innovation. We had rented a very nice hotel just across the river in New Jersey, but yeah, the pandemic kind of shut that down. But we're, so I'm a little frustrated. I mean, I'm doing my reporting from home. I'm doing my RT reports. I sit in front of my bookshelf on Skype, and I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm making a point of going and jogging every day to get outside to kind of work up a sweat, so I don't just have cabin fever. But it's frustrating, and the worst part is not being able to be around other people. I mean, my wife is here. Thank goodness I'm married, and my wife and I we're really bonding. It's really great, to have so much time together. But at the same time, I mean, it's unfortunate, to be able to get up and go and see your coworkers, to go sit in a restaurant. I love to read in restaurants. That's what I miss probably the most is going to a restaurant with a nice book, ordering some food, reading my book while I drink some Diet Coke. Can't do that. So that's a little bit frustrating. But I'm just trying to make the most of it, trying to be productive. I'm a go, go, go kind of guy. Anyone who's ever been my roommate has been a little bit frustrated by it because I never rest. I'm just kind of they say I'm a type A personality. I just kind of go, go, go. So for me to be a go, go, go kind of guy and just kind of be stuck at home, is a little bit frustrating, but I'm just trying to make the most of it and accomplish things while I do it.
All right. So, Tripod, you got that fixed?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right, cool. So I'm going to combine my questions now. I don't know if you heard that before. So firstly was, I mean, you can answer these together however you feels best. What's your thoughts of Vladimir Putin's rule of Russia? And secondly, do you think that Vladimir Lenin's definition of imperialism applies to modern Russia?
Okay. Well, first of all, Vladimir Putin, his achievement in Russia was saving the economy from the free market disaster of the 1990s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States worked very, very hard to meddle in Russia's elections to get Boris Yeltsin elected. And Boris Yeltsin proceeded to sell off the country to the highest bidder. And it was an economic disaster. Russia had a big free market experiment during the 1990s, and it resulted in huge rates of unemployment, 20 to 30%. Most of the country's factories closed down their doors. The farming industry crashed, and they started having to import all their food from the United States. Sex trafficking and human trafficking greatly expanded. Heroin addiction skyrocketed. The suicide rate was massive. It was just a disaster. And of course, during that time, the United States government loved Russia because, hey, they're our ally and they're letting the country be looted. And in fact, there was one of the leading anti-Putin lobbyists in Washington, D.C. is a guy named Bill Browder. And he was there. He was there working with Hermitage Capital Management and which he was tied in with British Petroleum. And they were looting Russia and just making the place a mess. Well, the rise of Vladimir Putin was a response to that. And basically, Putin wrote a dissertation, an academic dissertation, arguing that the way to save Russia's economy was to create two giant, state-controlled mega corporations. And he wrote, I mean, you can read his academic dissertation. He referred to these corporations. He referred to them as national champions, and he built them. And when he got into office, he put his dissertation into effect, and he created Gazprom and Rosneft. Gazprom is a natural gas company run by the Russian government, and Rosneft is an oil company run by the Russian government. And they sell energy. They're in the energy market. They have energy corporations. And they use the proceeds to subsidize the economy. And it was with Putin's reforms that Russia was able to get out of the absolute nightmare of the 1990s. Poverty has decreased significantly. The wages of workers have significantly increased. They've regained their industrial output. They're now producing more than they were in the 80s. And they've now had a farming boom now in Russia. The Russian government has subsidized the creation of all kinds of farmland. And there's actually a lot of new land because of global warming in the Far East. It's now parts of Russia where it wasn't easy to farm before, and now we have farming expanding, and Russia is having amazing harvests. And Putin has saved Russia's economy in many, many ways. And that Lenin's definition of imperialism. Now, this is the second question. Lenin's definition of imperialism is a system where you have monopolies of Western, or I shouldn't say Western, right? I guess according to Lenin, he didn't specify the geography, but it's when you have giant cartels and monopolies that are dominating the economies of the world. And they're dominating the economies of the world, and they're holding back economic development. They're keeping developing countries as kind of spheres of influence or captive markets. And if you look at what Russia is doing in the countries that it trades with, it's not doing that at all. It's doing the opposite. With the Eurasian Economic Union, they're subsidizing and they're building up. People talk about how Russia is working with Syria to develop their oil and gas resources. Well, they're not trying to put the Syrian oil and gas companies out of business. They're partnering with them, helping the Syrian gas companies and expand. And if you look at, I've been to Crimea, and if you look at Crimea is not being looted economically. It's booming. The Russian government has invested so much money into building bridges and funding technology and funding research. And I went to the Yalta Economic Forum. You wouldn't believe the amount of investment and efforts to help people in Crimea start their own small businesses. Russia wants to make Crimea more prosperous. So this notion that Russia is imperialist, it's not imperialist in the sense that Lenin spoke about at all. Imperialism is about keeping the world poor so that bankers can stay rich in the home country, and that's not what Russia is doing. In fact, Russia is spending a lot of its own money and resources to try and develop and stabilize the country it trades with. So it's a completely different economic relationship.
All right. So our next question comes from user I Am Okay. I also want to say I Am Okay was someone who helped us set up this AMA. Really appreciate it. He wants to know, I'm sure I'm saying this wrong, what are your thoughts on Bordika?
I'm not familiar. I haven't studied his work.
Okay. Our next question comes from Hacked Duck. He wants to know if you've read Britain's Road to Socialism, and if so, what do you think of it?
That was a document. I read it a long time ago that was published by the Communist Party of Britain, I believe. It was kind of their explanation of how they would move towards socialism in alliance with the Labour Party. I'm not in Britain in the 1950s. I'm not sure that was necessarily the right thing. Many people criticize that document for being a little bit too reformist. But at the same time, I do think it's important to emphasize that socialists, not just in our time, but have always advocated a peaceful transition to socialism, right? Violent revolutions happen, but they happen because capitalists want them to happen. But socialists have always advocated a peaceful transition. They've always advocated getting elected, working to reform the system and transform it to socialism peacefully, democratically, with popular will. And that violent revolutions are something that anyone with a rational mind would want to avoid. Violent revolutions are horrific. People die. Would be lucky you've never had to live through a violent revolution. And that a peaceful transition is what most people would favor. When peaceful transitions don't happen, it's because the capitalists are so desperate to stop the march of democracy, to stop the empowerment of the people, to hold on to their wealth, that they resort to violence and terror, and the people are forced to defend themselves. Revolutions are acts of great self-defense.
All right, and on that, I'm just kind of curious. How critical do you think German aid was in the 1917 Bolshevik revolution?
I don't know. No one knows. There's actually very little revealed about that. We know that on some degree in Russia, Lenin got some support from the Germans. We know that, right? And the Bolsheviks acknowledged that. They made articles kind of laughing it off, saying, a revolution only costs us this much money. I guess we should have just fundraised the whole time. Obviously that's not what caused the Russian Revolution, but to some degree or other, Lenin and the Bolsheviks received aid from the Germans. That's well established. What's funny, I think, is that these anti-Semitic neo-Nazi type people have been pushing this conspiracy theory that Wall Street and New York and Wall Street funded the Bolshevik Revolution. And in a lot of ways, that conspiracy theory is an attempt to ignore the fact that the Germans are more responsible than anybody else. I mean, they'll talk about a guy named Jacob Schiff, who was a Wall Street banker who funded something called the Russian Freedom Group. Well, the Russian Freedom Group was not the Bolsheviks. They were against the Tsar, but they were not. They were supporters of the provisional government and Alexander Kerensky. And the idea that the Russian Revolution was funded by Wall Street, that's easily debunked if you look at it. But they push that so hard because they're trying to, ignore the fact that it was actually Germans who probably had more to do with creating the Russian Revolution. I think that's kind of hilarious. But the reason that the Germans gave money to Lenin was because Lenin wanted to end the war, right? He wanted to end the war. And that was the issue there, right? That in 1917, right, you had the Tsar was brought down, you had the provisional government come in, but Russia was involved in World War I. And the Bolsheviks were known as the anti-war guys. They were going to end the war. And, General Kornilov attempted to take power and become the military dictator, and he was going to execute all the capitalists and people that were against the war and aggressively continue the war. And so the Bolsheviks formed their militias to defend the provisional government from Kornilov. They beat back Kornilov's reaction. And at that point, their armed groups that they built to defend themselves and defend their organizations were so big that they declared the Soviets or the workers' councils to be the new government. The Bolsheviks were the anti-war guys. They wanted to end the war. And what's ironic is that Trotsky, after the Bolsheviks took power, they then had to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, right, which was the treaty that ended World War I. And they sent Trotsky to go and sign the treaty. And Trotsky wouldn't do it. And Lenin was furious with Trotsky because Trotsky said, well, now that we've taken power, we're going to continue fighting World War I on a revolutionary basis. And Lenin said to Trotsky, no, the people brought us to power because we said we would end the war, and we have to end the war. And they ended World War I. And they were forced to give up a lot of territory. Russia lost a lot of territory at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. But they had to fulfill their promise. The people had brought them to power on the promise they would end World War I, and they fulfilled that promise.
All right, our next question is from Andy. He says that he's heard you mention the Workers' Party of Belgium and their electoral success in recent years. He wants to know if you could talk more about them and why you think they're making political gains.
Well, I have had the honor of meeting with members of the Workers' Party of Belgium at international conferences that I've gone to, the communist international gatherings and such. And they're a communist party that is what you could call anti-revisionist. They have not, there was Euro-communism was a big thing in the 70s, where all these communist parties in Europe were cutting their ties with the Soviet Union, announcing that, well, we kind of recognize the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union is not good. And, they weren't part of that. The Workers' Party of Belgium, they studied Mao, they were studying Stalin, and they're hardliners, and their views are not necessarily my own. I don't agree with them on some questions, but they're really, really serious, and they haven't gone along with this kind of ideological degeneration that we've seen on the political left. They still believe in Marxism. They're not pessimistic. They're not Malthusian. They're not hopeless. They haven't joined in this kind of destructive mindset. I talk about the synthetic left. They've hung true to their principles. And in this time when capitalism is collapsing, these principles are what people need more than ever. Popular power. Let the people run and control the economy. And we need people that will bring back Marxism and cling true to the principles that made socialism strong. So in that sense, I can see why they would be popular. What's interesting about them is that, they are one of the biggest leftist groups in Belgium. You would think that there'd be a more moderate social democratic party that would be far bigger or something, but the Workers' Party of Belgium is quite a major political force, very pro-Palestine, very anti-imperialist, they have a long history, with fighting for the people of the Congo. The Congo was colonized by Belgium, and so they were very involved in anti-colonial struggles. I have admiration for the work that they do.
All right. Our next question is from Northern Gentleman. He wants to know, within your political and philosophical understanding, what's the best way forward for Scandinavian countries?
Well, in the United States, a lot of people think that the Scandinavian countries are already socialist. And I would argue that they're not. They're capitalist countries with a very big welfare state. They provide a lot of services to their people. That's great. I'm for all those welfare programs. I'm not for rolling them back. But at the same time, we have to recognize that socialism is the banks, factories, and industries being controlled by the people and the economy being centrally planned. It's not just, a lot of welfare programs. And I think the biggest danger in Scandinavian countries right now is anti-immigrant bigotry, and that there is an inflow of refugees and migrants, and so on that basis, they have this very big welfare state, but there's a feeling that that's not sustainable now because of all these refugees coming in, and there's a rise of the new right, of like far right wing sentiments, and the response of liberals, and the mainstream left to the far right is pretty lame. It's just kind of, well, they're racist, so don't listen to them, or else you're a racist. Shut up, racist. And that's not an answer. We need real ideological answers. And now is the time more than ever for Marxists to differentiate themselves from liberals. Liberals don't have answers, and it's the same here in the United States, right? Immigration, mass migration, right? I mean, all kinds of people, can't live in their home countries because of capitalism and neoliberalism, and they have to flee from their homes, and they come to the United States. And, the right wing says, oh, these are all a bunch of criminals, deport them. They call for, things that would make things in this country far worse, ICE raids, tearing apart families, bigotry. They want to make, the right wing is just appealing to people's bigotry. But the left doesn't want to acknowledge that there's a problem. They just say, look, this is the American dream, right? People are coming to this new country, a new land. Oh, hooray, great, immigration. Not acknowledging that there's a problem, that people can't live in their homes, that people who live, in this country are living in the shadows, that they're being exploited and paid horrible wages, that our relationship with Latin American countries is economically not a good one, that we have to differentiate ourselves from mainstream liberals. And that the reason that the far right is growing in the United States is because Marxists and communists just have kind of faded into, they're kind of just a speck, an unnoticeable speck inside of liberalism. And liberalism cannot solve the crisis, right? We need real Marxist scientific answers about why things like mass migration are happening. And I think that's an even bigger issue in the Scandinavian countries than it is in the United States, even though it's pretty big here. So I think that if I were over there, I would be focusing on how can we give real answers to the workers and not just kind of dissolve into liberalism. How can we explain the problems of our current time in a way that makes clear we're not, liberals, we're not just advocates of the status quo, that we have real answers.
All right. Our next question is from Variety KGB. He wants to know, what do you think about Germany banning Hezbollah?
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? The Shia community has been very, very ruthlessly oppressed and mistreated. That goes on here in the United States. That goes on all across the world. And it doesn't make any sense because the terrorist attacks, 9/11 was conducted by, Osama bin Laden, who was not a Shia Muslim. He was a Saudi. He was a Wahhabi, right? The ISIS terrorists who committed the horrendous acts in Europe, they were, again, they were not Shia Muslims. They were Wahhabis tied to Saudi Arabia. And that the terrorists around the world tend to be people that are involved in U.S. foreign policy operations. In Syria, for example, right? In Syria, it's the Wahhabi extremists tied to Saudi Arabia, same people, same ideological grouping that conducted 9/11, that carries out terrorist attacks with ISIS and all that. That's the group that's being supported by the United States in efforts to bring down the Syrian government. You go to Yemen, right? Again, the Saudis, are bombing Yemen in alliance with the United States. U.S. made weapons. Congress vetoed, and Trump vetoed Congress's effort to try and restrict U.S. support for that bombing. Against, the Shia Muslim community is trying to unite Muslims, trying to, have Sunni and Shia not be at each other's throats and get along. They're trying to stabilize the region. And Hezbollah itself, I mean, they've been on the battlefield fighting against ISIS in Syria, supporting the Syrian government, protecting Christians. That's the aim of the forces trying to bring down the Syrian government is to establish a government for Sunni Muslims only. And they want to exterminate the Alawites, which are a religious group in Syria. They want to forcibly expel the Christians from Syria. And the forces that are supporting the Syrian government are trying to protect religious minorities, protect the Syrian Arab Republic, and trying to have religious freedom there. So this notion that the state should be going after Shia Muslims and persecuting Shia Muslims, the sanctions on Iran. This is a complete mistake. The most dangerous forces, you're worried about terrorism, are the ones tied to Saudi Arabia, are the ones involved in U.S. regime change operations in Libya and in Syria. Those are the dangerous forces. And I don't understand why we're going after the enemies of the terrorists, not going after the terrorists. But that applies to the whole war on terror. I mean, the invasion of Iraq. Saddam Hussein was an enemy of Al Qaeda. The USA overthrew him. Now Al Qaeda is, and those kind of forces, ISIS, have set up shop in Iraq. Right? Gaddafi was an enemy of Al Qaeda. He even offered to torture people for the U.S. government to fight Al Qaeda. Now he's been overthrown. Al Qaeda, ISIS have all set up shop in Libya. Right? Bashar Assad, enemy of Al Qaeda. Well, now we've fomented civil war. Al Qaeda, Al Nusra groups are all. I mean, this isn't a war on terror. I mean, a war on terror, you'd be fighting the terrorists, and instead we're fighting the enemies of the terrorists. And that's the same thing the German government is doing. Instead of going after, and there are forces all over Germany that are involved with subsidizing terrorist groups in Syria, that are involved in trying to bring down the Syrian government, that are trying to destabilize Syria. You talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, you talk about Saudi-aligned forces. There are plenty of forces there that are involved with terrorist groups that are trying to bring down the Syrian government. And the German government isn't going after them. It's actively supporting them as part of the effort to bring down the Syrian government. Instead, it's going after Shia Muslims, alleging that they may have some tie to groups in Lebanon. But even if they did, right? I mean, in Lebanon, Hezbollah fought against ISIS. So this is just, I don't understand the priority here. The more you look at the situation with terrorism and the war on terror and who gets repressed and who doesn't, it seems very apparent that our government isn't interested in actually keeping us safe. It's interested in pushing regime change wars. It's interested in overthrowing socialist governments and nationalist governments around the world, not keeping us safe from terrorism.
All right. So just for everyone here, we're halfway through here. We've got another hour here. And if you've joined in late, we're here talking with Caleb Maupin. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
It's French originally. It's probably like Maupin or something, but my family's been saying Maupin for hundreds of years. So
we're here with Caleb Maupin, and we've got about an hour left with questions here. If you want to ask a question, type it in Caleb Maupin questions above this VC. And if you want to just chat and comment as we go through, there's the discussion chat above that. Simon wants to know, what are your thoughts on Bernie Sanders?
Well, Bernie Sanders is an interesting guy. He started out, when he took office, when he got involved in Vermont politics, he was very clearly like an ally of the Communist Party, of the new communist movement. He had Trotskyite supporters, and he was a guy who comes from a left background. His foreign policy views are not mine. And in the 90s, they really started to shift. He supported Bill Clinton's bombing of Serbia. I obviously don't agree with that. And a lot of the things he said about foreign policy are not my view. He especially, it was very clear when he was mayor of Burlington and when he was first involved in Vermont politics, when he said socialist, he meant he wanted the banks, factories, and industries to be organized to serve public good, and he wanted a socialist society. Now he says socialism just kind of means a bigger welfare state, Roosevelt New Dealism. But he comes out of the movement, and that became very apparent. And the fact that when it looked like he might get the nomination, the media went into overdrive, playing up, good things he said about Fidel Castro and the Sandinistas. That's because they know who he is. I wrote an article called "A Deep State Grudge Against Bernie Sanders," and if you saw that meltdown by Chris Matthews, where he started, yelling about executions in Central Park and stuff like that, it's pretty clear the CIA knows that this is a guy who maybe he's changed his mind or whatever, but he was, friendly towards socialist and revolutionary forces at one time. We don't trust him. We're not going to let him in the White House, right? He might have some good policy ideas that might stabilize capitalism, sure. We're not going to let him get anywhere near the White House. And he was mistreated by the media, mistreated by the DNC. And so in that sense, I can look up and respect Bernie Sanders. But his views over the past 2 decades, his views have shifted significantly away from where I'm at as someone who believes in Marxism. But he's an interesting guy, and his movement is amazing. You talk to the young people at his rallies, there's so much hope, so much optimism. That's the future of the country, is those young people who love their country and they want to make a better country. and they don't trust the profiteers, and they don't trust the bankers, and they're opening to questioning this belief that capitalism is just the greatest system and the free market is always the answer. That's the hope. So anything that hardline revolutionary forces can do to gain an audience with those people, to get those people to actually engage with Marxist theory, is really, really important. I mean, during the 2016 campaign, I was blown away. I would go and cover Bernie Sanders rallies, and I would see maybe one or two communists there handing out newspapers. That was it. And I thought, this is New York City. There's a lot of communists in New York City, but they wouldn't go to those rallies. Instead, they were in a protest cage shouting at Trump supporters and shouting, "You racist, you're dirty piece of garbage, you Trump supporter." They were too busy cursing out Trump supporters to try and engage with the young people that were getting into socialism in the Bernie Sanders movement. It just was a mistaken priority.
Our next question comes from a user, Zoomer Nation. They want to know, why did you get a job working for the Iranian state television?
Well, I was a guest. I appeared for many years. I was a guest on Press TV. They had me on as an analyst, and they approached me about possibly starting to produce news packages, and I agreed. And I mean, it's that simple. Not much to it. Not much more to it than that. It was just I had been doing a lot of interviews with them, and I was familiar with the people who'd been making TV news packages, and they wanted to hire somebody to make some news packages. I wasn't really hired by them because that doesn't work with the sanctions. It was like I was kind of like it was like freelance work, kind of like I would produce news packages and then bill them for them and then eventually get paid. But yeah, I mean, it was a good job. It was very difficult. The pay, it was hard to get paid because of the sanctions, but going to Iran, I had the ability to visit Iran because of that, and that was a life-changing experience. I'm really glad I had that opportunity, and I really learned a lot, and I really ideologically matured as a result of the time I spent in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So, I think that it was a great thing. I don't regret making news packages for Press TV. I mean, Press TV is interesting. They do a lot of interesting documentaries and news pieces, and yeah, I mean, I'm glad I was able to cover. I covered the Black Lives Matter protests that happened. I covered that for Press TV. I covered a lot of interesting news stories. I got to cover events related to the Muslim community in New York City. I did a lot of United Nations reporting. So yeah, it was a good thing to do. And Press TV, they do a lot of good reporting.
Next question comes from the Silverish. He wants to know, he's as I gather, a citizen in Russia. He wants to know, in your time working for Russian media, how much misinformation have you seen working for their state media?
That's not a respectful question, and I'm not going to answer that.
Okay. Next question we've got here. Lil Bill wants to know, what kind of impact do you think the Green Party will have in the election?
I don't know. I know Howie Hawkins is going to be their candidate. He's a Teamster. He's a socialist. And the Socialist Party's already endorsed him. And I guess he's going to be the Green nominee, most likely. He's trying to push the Green Party in kind of a more socialistic direction. I mean, the Green Party really, I mean, it was the 90s is really when they got their energy. And they were very much a party of environmentalism, pacifism. They were very much a new left party. But in these times, as the economy becomes the biggest issue, as the working class is suffering, they're going to have to move in a more socialistic direction. And they have moved. I mean, Jill Stein's 2016 campaign was very socialistic. And it looks like Howie Hawkins, a longtime Teamster organizer, a socialist, is going to be the voice of the Green Party in the 2020 elections. And I think that shows the way the wind is blowing. I don't think, I mean, people always want to blame third parties, like they're going to take votes away. They're going to cause the other candidate they disagree with the most to win or something like that. But I mean, the Democrats, I'm sorry. I mean, Joe Biden, I mean, I'm not giving my opinion in terms of, I obviously disagree with Joe Biden on a lot of political things, but also, I mean, at this point, he's blatantly inarticulate. And now we've seen all those videos of the inappropriate things he did with women in front of cameras. And now we've got the Tara Reade stuff. I mean, are they stupid? Do they just want to lose? Do the Democrats just want to lose this time? I mean, I mean, unless like the elections are canceled because of coronavirus or something. I mean, I don't know what are the Democrats going for here? I mean, I don't know how Joe Biden's family is letting him do this. I mean, this is just, I'm watching the Joe Biden campaign. It's months away from the election, and I'm like, is this really happening? Like, I mean, it seems like the Democrats are throwing the game. So there you go.
All right, and on that, so we've had a lot of questions. If I gather, you don't like either, but the questions are basically, if you had to choose Trump or Biden, and why?
Well, first of all, I don't endorse any candidate because I'm a reporter. It's important that I remain objective.
Mhm.
And so I don't endorse either candidate. I report on the campaigns. And it's very important that if I were to give a full-on endorsement of either of the major candidates, that would discredit my reporting in a lot of ways. But that said, I'm just being blatantly honest and telling you I don't know who's better, Trump or Biden. And I felt it was weird. My whole life, up until the 2016 elections, I always felt that the Democrats were slightly better. That was always how I felt, right? I would vote for socialists because I wanted to make a statement, but there was always kind of part of me that said, if a Democrat wins, that shows that, that things are slightly better. People are a little more open-minded or whatever. 2016 was the first time in my life where I didn't feel that way. On election night, I didn't know if Trump would be better or Hillary Clinton would be better. Whenever Trump started talking about immigration or Islam, I was like, this guy is disgusting. But whenever Trump started talking about foreign policy, it seemed like a breath of fresh air. Like, finally, someone's talking about why these wars are bad, why our intervention in Syria isn't necessary. Trump said a lot of good stuff on the campaign trail about foreign policy. And then Hillary Clinton, when she was criticizing Trump for being a racist and criticizing him for his anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim remarks, great. But whenever she opened her mouth about foreign policy, I didn't agree with her. And then also what was very scary was her allegations about, Trump, he has support because there are these quote unquote conspiracy theories on the internet. And, people are not having faith in our American democratic system. And we need to control the internet and shut down all these people that have the wrong thoughts. And I was just like, there were things about Hillary Clinton I found to be very, very scary. So election night, I didn't know who I wanted to win. I expected Hillary Clinton would win. Well, Trump won. And at this point, in some ways, I mean, I can see arguments in Biden's favor. It seems like Biden's much more of a manager. It seems like he would probably be more effective in managing things like the pandemic, that his wing of the American capitalist class would have their shit together a little bit more and would be able to get things done more effectively. But at the same time, Joe Biden, I read to my viewers on YouTube, and I do YouTube lives every week, by the way. Come on, join the community. I answer people's questions. It's a lot of fun. Thousands of people watch. It's really fun. But Joe Biden, I read his article that he wrote to Foreign Affairs magazine. And I read it. And it was his announcement about what he would do different than Trump. It was very scary. I mean, America must lead again. And it was a call for rolling back and just straight up geopolitical confrontation with Russia and China, massive internet censorship, a crackdown on alternative views on the internet. It was very scary. And that, but then again, Trump is completely incompetent. Trump is appealing to racism and bigotry. Trump has escalated with Iran and Venezuela in ways that are horrendous. So I don't know who's better. And I feel the same way I felt in 2016. I don't know. I think both candidates have good things and bad things in their favor. Both of them are pretty bad, but I'm not sure which one's actually better. And that's a weird position to be in. It used to be socialists always felt that the Democrats and the left were always better. I don't feel that way anymore. I think a lot of socialists agree with me that we're not sure.
Next question here comes from Lincolnite Yankee. Excuse me, sorry. Lincolnite Yankee. He wants to know if you could tell everyone here about your 4 steps for putting the USA on the path to socialism.
Sure. I've always said that 4 concrete things could be done that would transform the United States. And if we did these things, we'd be thoroughly on the road to socialism, if not socialist already. The first would be a massive infrastructure program, hiring thousands and thousands of people to start rebuilding the country, build high-speed railway, build new universities, build new schools, build new water treatment facilities, build new public transportation systems, just completely revamp the country, a new public works program. That's number 1. Number 2, how are you going to pay for it? Well, we nationalize our natural resources. The oil in the United States, the natural gas under our feet in the shale, the coal, the timber, all of the fruits of nature in the United States should be public property. They're the property of every American. Everyone born here should have a right to those things, right? Just because, it shouldn't be the property of some banker, Carnegie, DuPont, Rockefeller. I think all Americans should share from the profits of our natural resources. The profits from our oil and gas and timber and coal should go into the public budget. So that's number two. Number three is banking. I think banking and the lending of money should be in the hands of the state, right? I don't think we should have a Federal Reserve rip-off system. I don't think we should have private banks lending money. You don't have to be a communist to agree with me about this. I mean, every major religion, the Quran, the Bible, the Torah, and the Talmud all forbid the lending of money at interest, and there's a reason for that, because it leads to the creation of a creditor class, right? A group of people who have money by having money, right? They're lending money at interest. They're not doing anything. They're not creating anything, right? They're just getting money by having money. And pretty soon, they're going to have more money than everybody else. And governments are going to be in debt to them, and they're going to have all the power. There's a reason that every major religion forbids it, right? You don't want to have a creditor class ruling over the rest of society. So I would put the lending of money into the hands of the state, so that there was that the lending of money was in the hands of the state. If somebody wanted, a loan to start their business, they had to make a case that it was good for the community. And then when they paid back their loan, the interest would go into the public budget, so we can have more schools and more healthcare. So that's number three, control of banking. And number four, I've always said we need to enact Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights. Before he died, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who I think was our greatest president. I mean, he wasn't a socialist or a communist, but he was a Bonapartist who aligned with socialists and communists. And he said that we ought to have the right to health care, the right to education, the right to decent employment. And he had this proposal for a new economic bill of rights. And I think we should enact that. That's my 4-point program. If I were running for office, I would run, on that platform. I think that we ought to rebuild the country, mass public works and infrastructure. I think we ought to nationalize our natural resources, our oil, gas, timber, and coal. I think we need to have public control of banking and the lending of money. And on top of that, I think that we need to enact Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights. If we did those things, we'd be on the road to socialism. And I've actually summarized it with the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families. Because right now, we have what Roosevelt called do-nothing government. We have a government that says, you're on your own, right? The government's best that governs least. It's not the government's fault. Society's falling apart. Water's not being purified. Roads are crumbling. Crime is rising. I mean, everything's falling apart. And we got a government that's just sitting back and saying, hey, it's the American way. You're on your own. I would put an end to that. I say we need a government of action. If a parent is not feeding their child, the parent is not giving their child, adequate clothing, right? Maybe that parent may not be actively doing anything to harm that child, but it's still a crime. It's called neglect. Our government right now is guilty of criminal neglect of the country. They have left the population behind. And on top of that, I would say they are in dereliction of duty, right? The Constitution, the preamble talks about the common welfare and our government is completely in dereliction of duty. We need a government of action to fight for working families. It's the urgent necessity of our time. And that's what a socialist government would be. It would be a government that would get things done. It would mobilize the population. It would fight for the people, and it would put public good and public needs ahead of the interests of bankers and profiteers.
Right. Sorry. So you just said that FDR you think was our best president. Who would you say was the worst American president?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I really didn't like George W. Bush. I'll tell you that much. I was really not a fan of his. But I really particularly didn't like Barack Obama. I guess if you rate worst in terms of how much damage they did, not in terms of their intentions, not in terms of what they meant historically, but in terms of damage, Barack Obama did more damage than any other president. I mean, Barack Obama, he took that optimism that so many young people had. It was so much hope. We're going to get past racism in this country. We're going to protect civil liberties. We're going to, stop having wars around the world. And he just threw that hope in the garbage. And he created so much cynicism, right? He the Arab Spring. You had all these people across the Middle East rising up and fighting for their rights during an economic crisis. And he used social media and the Hillary Clinton State Department, Anne-Marie Slaughter, to just manipulate those sentiments to create regime change wars. If you look at the Obama presidency, I think Obama meant well. I don't think he's a bad guy. I think he probably is a guy with good intentions. But in terms of damage that they did to people in the United States and around the world, I mean, the Obama administration is a pretty good example of a pretty good contender for worst. I mean, that's not to say. I mean, I can think of like the Hoover administration did horrendous things. There were many presidents who worked to defend the slaveholders, in the slave system in the South, and that was horrendous. Many of our early presidents were just completely tied in with the slave system and the British Empire. I mean, you can't talk about slavery without talking about the British Empire. I mean, the reason that the slave plantation system existed in the South was because it was tied into selling cheap cotton to the British Empire. And Wall Street started out as insuring slave ships and insuring cotton exports. So, it's that global capitalist system where Western bankers dominate the global economy, where they get richer and richer despite the fact that no real wealth is being created. That's the problem. And, I think Barack Obama created a lot of pessimism, a lot of cynicism, and a lot of hopelessness. I think he personally had very good intentions, though. And he really knew how to appeal to the best in people. And I admire that about him. I don't think he was a bad guy. I think he did a lot of damage. So is that fair?
I think that's fair. And there was one other question about presidents that one of our users brought up while we're on this. They want to know in particular, what were your thoughts about Reagan?
Well, what's interesting is that, Carter, who came before Reagan, Carter was the change in leftism, right? Before Carter, the previous Democratic president had been John F. Kennedy. And John F. Kennedy he was not a socialist or a communist, but he appealed to that optimism, that hope, that effort. I guess there was Lyndon Johnson after him, but Johnson was the vice president under Kennedy, and both Johnson and Kennedy, they appealed to that hope, right? It was like they were liberals, but they were progressives, right? They wanted to eradicate poverty. They wanted to build a better tomorrow, and in his final years, right before he was killed, Kennedy even talked about having the moon mission be a joint operation with the Soviets. I bet you didn't know that. In his final UN speech, he called for the USA and the Soviet Union to have a joint mission to the moon, right? Imagine if that had happened, if an American and a Russian or a Soviet person had been on the moon shuttle together. Imagine how different our world would be if Kennedy had pulled that off. Well, Kennedy was assassinated. And you had the Johnson administration, the war on poverty, and then, you had Nixon, you had Ford, and then Jimmy Carter came in as a Democrat, but it was a new Democratic Party. It was a pessimistic Democratic Party. You had the Trilateral Commission, which was the Rockefeller think tank that had been set up, and almost all the major figures in the Carter administration were from that think tank. And Carter, when the economy started having a downturn, he told Americans, well, you like things too much. You want material goods too much. Americans couldn't afford to pay their heating bills, right? The price of energy and gas was too high. And so he said, well, you ought to wear a sweater. You ought to wear a cardigan sweater. And he started wearing a sweater and telling Americans not to turn up their heat. And he was really pushing this idea that we all just need to be poorer, that the population is too big. He went after the labor wing of his own party. He launched what was called AbScam. I don't know if folks have seen the movie American Hustle, but it was a movie that was fictionalizing what actually the Carter administration did, which is that they sent the FBI. They had a guy dressed up as a Middle Eastern sheik to go and entrap different politicians around the country, especially in New Jersey, who and entrap them and make them look like they were taking bribes. And the target was labor union oriented Democrats who were tied to the Longshoremen's Union, to the Teamsters, and guys who were fighting for the working class, and that's who they went after. And in some cases, it was ridiculous. Like one of these congressmen, the FBI informant gave him this suitcase of cash, and he pushed it away and said, "I don't want it." On the video, he pushed it away, but that wasn't enough. They still convicted him, and he persecuted the labor and working class wing of his own party. And the economy was in a downturn. So then Reagan seized on all the frustration with that and said, are you any better than you were 4 years ago? Reagan was awful. He was for the military industrial complex. He was for an aggressive foreign policy, but he appealed to the failures of that synthetic left. When that left that is pessimistic and hopeless and problematic takes power and makes people's lives worse and kind of argues their lives should be worse, you have the right seizing on it. And Reagan appealed to the good side of Americans. And he said, I believe in growth and it's morning in America. And he was appealing to people's desire to be progressive and entrepreneurial. He used it for evil, but he appealed to it. And I think Trump is a very similar story. The Obama administration was so cynical and resulted in so many negative things. Trump comes in and says, I'm going to make America great again. It's the same kind of thing. The right gains when the left fails. And I think that Reagan's an example of that. And Trump is also an example of that.
Okay. So definitely switching gears here. Biocon wants to know, how do we deal with overpopulation?
I don't think we deal with overpopulation. Overpopulation is a term invented by an economist in Britain named Malthus, Robert Thomas Malthus, or Thomas Robert Malthus, I think. And Karl Marx completely rips him to shreds in his book Theories of Surplus Value. He shows that this notion that that the food supply doesn't catch up with the population, so we just have to have big wars and lots of killing and destruction in order to reduce the population. That's a big lie, right? We do have a problem with our resources, right? We need to get off of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels is a prison house for humanity, right? We have to get nuclear energy. We have to get cold fusion, and we have to get higher forms of energy. And this notion that alternative energy just means setting up windmills and solar panels, that's not going to do it. I'm for windmills. I'm for solar panels. There's something good. But we need higher forms of energy, right? And we need to start considering getting resources from other planets. We need to build a space program. We need to get out of the idea that saving the environment means ending human progress, right? It doesn't mean that. Saving the environment means unleashing human progress and finding our ability to stop using resources in the same way. The Club of Rome, which is one of the major think tanks in Europe, it's tied in with a lot of UN officials. They put out a book called The Limits to Growth in the 1970s. And that book said, made all kinds of outrageous predictions that didn't come true. And why they didn't come true? They didn't come true because human beings are creative creatures, right? I mean, if that book said we would run out of oil within the next, few decades. Well, we didn't. Why? Hydraulic fracking, deep sea drilling. We developed new methods of getting oil, right? I mean, human beings are creative creatures. We have figured out how to use electricity. We've figured out how to use natural gas. We've figured out all kinds of things that we can do. We can solve our problems by being creative. I believe that. And the population expanding is a good thing because it means that we're growing as a society, and overpopulation is dangerous in my view. And Malthusianism, the British Empire, eugenics, these are really, really dangerous ideas that are used by the richest of the rich, right? And imagine a game of King of the Mountain, right? You ever play that game when you were a kid? You're all trying to get to the top of the hill. Well, imagine, somebody gets to the top of the hill and they announce game over, I'm at the top of the hill, so the game's over. That's what the ruling class of the world is doing. The richest of the rich right now, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, they are at the top of the hill and they are announcing, you know what? Hey, we run fossil fuels, we run Wall Street, we run all the big banks, and we're tied in with ExxonMobil and BP and all of that. And you know what? You're right. The environment, hey, we got to just, we're at the top of the hill, game over. That's what they're saying. Well, game over is not going to work, right? I mean, countries need to rise out of poverty. New things are left to be invented. The human species is defined by our creativity and our ability to expand. So it can't be game over. We need to find a solution to climate change that's not game over, right? We need to have innovation. We need to advance. We need to think outside the box, but we can't be saying game over. But if you were the ultra rich, if you were the richest of the rich, you would say game over because you're at the top of the hill, right? Eventually, China is rising out of poverty. Russia and China, Eurasia are becoming global superpowers. We're going to live in a multipolar world. We're different. It's not the whole world revolving around the United States and Britain, right? There's going to be a multipolar world where different countries have influence. That's a good thing in my view. But the effort to stop it is largely an effort to say, game over, overpopulation, let's freeze economic growth around the world, and let's just kind of keep things as they are. I don't agree with it.
All right. Our next question comes from our favorite user again, DMMRX, left arrow 80105, right arrow star. They want to know, what do you make of the economic calculation problem?
I mean, do they want to get more specific than that? I mean, there's a lot of economic calculation problems.
Oh, so when they say like the economic calculation problem, it's the idea that, you know, with a command economy, you can't figure out the best way to allocate resources. You're always going to have mismanagement. It's kind of like overproduction in the Soviet Union of certain goods and underproduction of others, etc. And there's the idea that in the free market, you're going to be able to, through in supply demand, find that equilibrium.
Well, I think you need a market sector to some degree. I mean, when it came to consumer goods, the Soviet Union had a problem, clearly. The Soviet Union was very good at steel manufacturing. They were very good at electricity. They were very good at education. But when it came to, you know, soda and, you know, consumer goods, I mean, the consumer goods from the West were always better. And that's, I mean, I think you need a market sector in a socialist society. China has realized that. I'll tell you the best story I ever heard. I was in Russia and I was talking, there was a woman I was talking to who had grown up in the 1990s. She had lived through the fall of the Soviet Union. And she told me the fall of the Soviet Union was horrible, just horrible. It was awful economically. And it was her first election to vote, but she just couldn't bring herself to vote for the Communist Party in that election. And you know why? Because she had some sneakers. She had Nike sneakers, right? And it was the first time in her life she'd been able to go and buy Nike sneakers. They didn't have those, right? The Soviet Union had been economically blockaded, and the socialist economic system of the Soviet Union, they didn't produce fancy new sneakers. And so she just couldn't bring herself to vote for the Communist Party. But what's amazing is that China has figured out how you can have both socialism and sneakers. And that's what's amazing, right? In China, the major centers of economic power, banking, you know, most industries are state run, but you have all kinds of independent companies that make consumer goods that are great. And so they have socialism and sneakers. And I think that's great, right? That old Soviet model where everything's run by the government. You have to remember why it came into existence. It was because they didn't have anything before. These were not industrialized societies. And it was socialism that laid the basis for industrializing, you know, both Russia and China, raising them out of poverty, turning them into industrial superpowers. No one ever talks about that. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, people should be able to start their own company to make, you know, a new computer app or a new computer program, right? People should be able to invent a new kind of soda or design unique clothes. I believe in entrepreneurialism when the economy is controlled by society, when you don't have profits in command. But there should be space for entrepreneurialism, for creativity, for market solutions.
All right. I'm a little bit surprised by that. Doesn't that? I mean, I'm just asking for you to expand on that, because most people who are socialists or communists seem to oppose markets on principle. Do you not see markets as contradictory?
Well, no, we need to differentiate between markets and capitalism. Markets long predated capitalism, right? Number one, there were markets in ancient Greece. There were markets in feudalism. You know, and there were markets in socialism. They had stores, right? Products were sold, others sold. People voted with their dollars and bought this product or didn't buy that product. The question is, should profits in the market be in control? Should it just be let the market do what it needs to do? Or should we have central planning? Should the government direct how much steel is produced? Should the government make sure that everyone has housing and education? Should the government control the lending of money? That's the difference. When the commanding heights of the economy are under the control of the state and not operating according to profits, and when you have a state that is powerful enough to protect people from the problems of the market, at that point it's socialism. But I think there's a role for the market in socialism. I think that not recognizing that is a bit of a mistake. I like worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives in and of themselves are not socialism, but they're better because not only are they better in the sense that no one's exploiting anyone else's labor, but on top of that, they're better because everyone has a drive to produce. And I would think that a socialist society in the United States, sure, we'd have big industries that were nationalized, you know, but we'd also have a lot of worker cooperative owned restaurants, a lot of worker cooperative owned, you know, clothing lines and tech startups. You know, maybe we'd probably have a lot of private companies as well. But the idea is we'd have a government of action that would be there to control the economy and there to make sure that people were protected and profits wouldn't have absolute control. The capitalists and the businessmen would be secondary, and the state wouldn't be serving them; it would be serving the people.
All right. Our next question comes from Tripod. Are you there, Tripod?
Gonzalo, if you know Gonzalo and all that kind of area of.
Can you start over, man? You were muted on your end.
Oh, yes. What do you think of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and that kind of area, Gonzalo and that stuff, Naxalites?
Well, here's the thing. Okay, so Mao is probably going to be remembered as like Julius Caesar, right? I mean, how many thousands of years ago was it? 2000, almost 2000 years ago, Julius Caesar was in Rome. We all know about him. We all know about Alexander the Great. There's individuals that have such a big impact on world history that can't be forgotten, right? And Mao started the process of China becoming what it is today, a global superpower. It went from being the sick man of Asia. It's now a global superpower. Mao was a brilliant political organizer. He had a real understanding of China and its unique culture and history and how to organize people. He also had a really unique and brilliant understanding of of Marxism, Leninism, and socialism. He was influenced by Kropotkin and anarchism. No one talks about that, but he was. And Mao was a genius. Maoism, right? And those who call themselves Maoists, those who denounce China and say that China has abandoned Mao's true path, and they are Maoists. Often those folks, I mean, it's not scientific Marxism, it's religion. People who say the Soviet Union became capitalist when Stalin died. China became capitalist after Mao died. All the other countries like Cuba and Vietnam are all fake socialist revisionists because they don't follow Mao's one true holy line. This is problematic, and that fighting for the rights of rural people and peasants, right, and fighting against the elements of feudalism that still exist in the world today in places like India and Latin America is a very good thing, and they've made their contribution. But in India, for example, right, India has the largest industrial working class of any country in the world outside of China, right? They are the second largest industrial working class in the world. To be in the countryside trying to organize some kind of 1930s peasant war, doesn't make sense. I mean, if you were a revolutionary in India, wouldn't you be trying to organize unions among those workers? But a lot of the Naxal groups, not only do they not do that, they actually assassinate, I kid you not, murder Indian communists who are organizing Indian workers. I mean, I've met with communists from India. They hate the Naxalites. Talk to the Communist Party of India Marxists, talk to the Socialist Unity Center of India, talk to the Communist Party of India. Those people fear for their lives. Naxals, they don't try to unify with those groups. They actively murder people in those groups for being fake socialists and not true revolutionaries. That's problematic. And when I talk to communists from Peru about the Shining Path, the same thing. They say, we never heard of Gonzalo. We never heard of it, right? And then out of the blue, there's people coming to our meetings with guns and shouting, "Viva Presidente Gonzalo," and trying to blow us away. The fanatical violence those groups are associated with. Violence, not only, violence and adventurous violence against the state or whatever, but even against other socialists and leftists. Very problematic. And again, socialism, yes, organizing the peasantry is important, but in our time, where people are being industrialized, where there's workers in the cities, why fixate on staying in the countryside, trying to reenact, Mao's peasant uprisings in the 1930s? And on top of that, why engage in violence against other leftist groups, and even the violence, the violence those groups have conducted. You read about the Shining Path. Cutting people's heads off. The way they would like hang dogs as their threat. This is not. I see this as problematic. This is ultra left. This is adventurist. This is terrorist. This is there's different names for it, but Marxists have always kind of opposed that kind of punchism, Blanquism, obsession with violence. This is not scientific socialism. It's very problematic. That's not to say that there aren't political trends that maybe started out in that political current and could develop in a good way. And that's not to say they've never fought for the rights of people who've been suffered and done good work. But at the same time, I see a lot of what those groups do as very problematic, to say the least. And the communists in the countries where those kind of groups operate feel the same way.
All right. So I think you've mentioned it a few times, and I've actually got a burning question of my own here. Julius Caesar, hero or tyrant?
Michael Parenti wrote an amazing book called, the Assassination of Julius Caesar: A People's History of Ancient Rome. In my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I actually drew and quoted extensively from that Parenti book. Julius Caesar was a populare, or a populist, right? He fought for the Roman proletariat, right? Rome was the first place in human history where you had the proletariat, right? In Rome, in other countries, you had landowners and serfs, you had slaves and masters. But Rome was the first place where you had people with nothing to sell but their labor power. They weren't owned by anybody else, but they sold their labor power to survive. And in Rome, you started to have homelessness, right? Because if you didn't pay your rent, you were on the street. And the Christian religion, let's remember, Christianity started out in Palestine, but the reason it became the religion that it is today is because it caught on in Rome, when Rome was the center of the world. And it was the religion of the proletarians of Rome, right? And Christians built orphanages for the homeless children. And they had food programs to feed the proletarians. And they preached this kind of message about love thy neighbor. And, Christianity served a purpose in Rome as a religion that protected and facilitated the proletariat. And Julius Caesar, now he predates Christianity. Christianity didn't catch on in Rome until, hundreds of years later. But Julius Caesar, he was a politician in Rome, a military leader who became a champion of the proletariat, right? And in his final years, before he was assassinated, I keep repeating that phrase. It keeps coming up on this live. I don't know why, but before he was assassinated, Julius Caesar had a plan to completely change the Roman Empire. He wanted to grant citizenship to the peoples throughout the empire, in Gaul, in the cities like Athens, and Alexandria. He wanted to give citizenship to people around the empire so that they wouldn't just be subjects of it, so that they would have a vote and that they would be part of it. He wanted to make the Roman Empire sustainable. You look at Julius Caesar's economic vision for how he wanted to change the Roman Empire. He was basically doing a 45 BC version of the Belt and Road Initiative of China. He was a city builder. He realized that Rome's relationship with the world, where they went around the world seizing tribute from people with spears, and extracting slaves and tribute from foreign countries and dragging the loot back to the homeland, that was not a sustainable economic model. He wanted to make Rome an industrious country. He built libraries and schools. He wanted to have an educated population. He wanted to bring the peoples throughout the empire into the decision making. He wanted to turn Alexandria and Athens and other cities into like great centers of trade and hubs. He was a progressive. He was in the middle of an evil reactionary empire, but he had a progressive mindset. He was a lot like Roosevelt, I think. Roosevelt was, the United States is a country founded on slavery, genocide of Native Americans, involved in all this imperialism. But Roosevelt had a progressive mindset, and he was doing his best to try and implement something progressive amid, a reactionary force. I look up to Julius Caesar because of that. Obviously, he was problematic in many ways. I mean, he freed a lot of slaves, but he also owned a lot of slaves, right? He obviously engaged in a lot of plunder of peoples around the empire, and there's many things about him that are hateable. But in his mindset, he believed in humanity. He believed people are not animals. He believed in historical progress, and he wanted to change the relationship of the Roman Empire to the world and make it a progressive force, rather than a force holding back history and destruction. So I look up to him in that sense.
All right. Mike has a question. Would you rather fight a lion or a cheetah, and why?
I don't know. I have very little experience battling wild animals. So I guess I would say a lion, because I think they're more common. And it would be kind of, fighting a lion, I can see that as being like more romantic kind. I can see a painting of fighting a lion. A painting of fighting a cheetah, not so much.
Yeah, there's the heroic defeat of fighting a lion. Cheetah's like, yeah, you're going to lose, but it's not really worth a painting when you lose there. So
Exactly.
Zoomer Nation wants to know: do you consider yourself an American nationalist?
No, for multiple reasons. First of all, America is not a nation, right? A nation is something that's defined in Marxism. Lenin, Stalin, others made a definition of a nation, but Max Weber and others, a nation is a people with a common culture, common history, a common language. The United States is not a nation. It never has been. We are a country with many different nations in it. And so, I'm not a nationalist because I'm not, America is not a nation. You can't be an American nationalist. But on top of that, national chauvinism is a problem, right? Here in the United States, people are always saying, this is the greatest country in the world. This is the greatest country in the world. That's completely arrogant, rude, and disrespectful, right? And if you ask people, hey, why is this the greatest country in the world? Like, what metric have you used? And they just look at you. What are you saying? This isn't the greatest country in the world? How can you not think it's the greatest? And you say, but how did you measure this? Are you saying we have the best economy? Are you saying, well, America's the greatest because we are? That's awful. That's just awful. It's an awful way of thinking. And it's ignorant, and I'm opposed to chauvinism, right? And nationalism in Western capitalist countries tends to be chauvinism. It tends to be, my country is better. Your country needs to be more like our country. We're going to invade you and educate you and make you better. I'm opposed to that, right? There are some values I associate with America that are very good, like entrepreneurialism, like hard work, like, but at the same time, there are things about this country that are deeply problematic. And I don't think we should be saying we're the greatest and that, other countries are just, inferior to us. I don't think we should be imposing our way on other people. And so in that sense, I'm definitely not an American nationalist. I guess that's a long way of saying no.
Okay. And next question we have here, Muscaro wants to know, do you speak Russian?
Nope.
And Manoj wants to know, do you consider yourself a globalist?
Well, see, what is globalism? There's a divide in the capitalist class of the United States and Western Europe, right? The dominant faction, the richest of the rich, they believe in more of a global economy. They're tied in more with banking and big oil. And so you have the new right that are like lower levels of capital, industrialists, weapons manufacturers and stuff. And they call them globalists. And they say they're nationalists and you guys are globalists. I'm not for either of those factions. I think they're both horrendous factions. But am I globalist in the sense that I want friendship with countries around the world? Absolutely. Right? Am I globalist in the sense that I think multipolarity is going to become a reality? Yes. Am I globalist in the sense that I think we should have a better relationship with countries around the world, that we should trade with them on the basis of win-win cooperation? Yes. I think that the Belt and Road Initiative coming out of China, Xi Jinping's vision of a shared community of all mankind, that's globalism, but it's not capitalist globalism. Globalism is associated with free market, neoliberalism, going all over the world, driving the wages down, destroying countries, destroying economies, forcing workers to compete in this global race to the bottom. I'll work for less wages. No, I'll work for less wage. That needs to be gotten rid of, right? That capitalist globalism is a nightmare. But I think that there could be a globalism based on mutual respect and trade. And, I like the Eurasian Economic Union that Russia is doing. I like the Belt and Road Initiative that China is doing. I like the Alba Bank of Latin America that Venezuela set up. I like the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. I think there is a progressive globalism that could emerge. But when you say globalism, you probably mean that capitalist globalism. So I don't agree with that.
All right. And your YouTube channel, how long have you had your YouTube channel?
At least a decade.
Okay. And I see you're at 9.98 thousand subscribers. What are you gonna do when you reach 10,000?
I'm gonna do some kind of celebration. I didn't know it was that close, but I'm glad. But yeah, we'll have some kind of celebration to celebrate the 10,000 mark for sure. I'll have to think about what it'll be, but the clock is ticking, so I better think of it quick.
Well, so everyone in the chat, if you aren't yet, it's in our Ping Partners page. If you scroll up near the top, let's help them get to 10,000. Looks like it's less than 20 away, so think fast. Let's see. Next question. We've got 10 minutes left here. If you guys got something last minute you've been thinking that you want to ask, go ahead and put it out. I will focus on newer questions rather than old ones. If you guys missed out, sorry, we can't get to all these questions. Let's see. Manoj wants to know, do you think we will eventually move towards a global government?
No. No, I think that there will be sovereignty of countries. I think that people are going to want to do things their own way. There'll be more international cooperation, but I think the nation state as it currently exists is going to be around for a lot longer.
Roving wants to know, what things from Marx and Lenin have you read, and what things would you say you disagree with them when it comes to either Marx or Lenin and their theories?
Well, what have I read? I mean, I could sit here. I mean, I could recite. I mean, I've been studying this stuff for years. I mean, with Marx, obviously the key text is the Communist Manifesto. There's also the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. There's Capital. There's Wages, Prices, and Profits. There's a lot by Marx. With Lenin, there's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. There's What Is to Be Done. There's The State in Revolution. There's Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. There's what else? I mean, there's a lot. I actually, at one point, I owned the complete works of Lenin. I just gave it to a friend of mine. I had the complete works of Lenin, all like 47 volumes, I think, at one point. And I used to just take one of them with me on the subway on the way to work. I just randomly pick one and just skim it on the train. Read the letters he wrote to people, read the arguments he was having, the little articles he wrote for socialist newspapers. But I think with Marx, the main thing I disagree with Marx is that Marx thought that Western capitalism, because it was the most advanced, would just expand across the world. And that when it expanded to places like India and Africa, it would bring this advanced Western capitalism to those countries and make them more advanced. He didn't foresee the development of imperialism, and that Marx was quite Eurocentric. And that I don't agree with. I think that Marx also, at the time, you have to remember, coming out of feudalism, right? During feudalism, there was no recognition that people were biological creatures. There was no recognition that human beings, have an animalistic side. It was kind of all thought that human beings were just souls. They could obey God or not obey God. They could obey their masters on earth or not. And so the Enlightenment, and then eventually, the rise of capitalism in Europe and the Romantic era, this idea that human beings, are animals, right? That they pursue pleasure, they avoid pain. That was very revolutionary at the time, right? Because you couldn't say that during the time of feudalism. Human beings were viewed only as spiritual creatures, and so Marx and Freud and Charles Darwin and others came along and said human beings are animals. They have biological impulses, and we're going to interpret human beings in that way. And that was very revolutionary at that time. I think Marx went a little bit too far with it, and so did Freud. And that they kind of saw people as animals. And that Marx, even in some of his letters that he writes to Engels, he's saying, why am I doing this, right? According to my theories, socialism will just kind of naturally happen because it's in everyone's own interest, right? And that Marx kind of underestimated the spiritual quality of human beings, the ability of human beings to fight for a cause that's greater than themselves, to work against their own interests for what they believe is right. Yeah, underestimated that to some degree. With Lenin, I think that Lenin, there's a lot of things that you can look up to about Lenin. But at the same time, there's, with Lenin, he was very, very obsessed with nationalities. And that many have argued that he tried to emphasize the differences of people within the socialist countries, within the Soviet Union, a little bit too much. And that may have been problematic. But maybe, at the time, again, the Russian Empire had, not allowed people to develop their own language, had suppressed cultures of people in Moldova and Ukraine and places like that. So Lenin really emphasized the cultural differences and really emphasized different nationalities. And again, he's trying to correct a mistake and maybe going a little bit too far with it. So I think everything has to be put in proper context. It's not a question of right and wrong. It's a question of understanding why people said things and what happened as a result of why they said them. You don't want to think of things as this is right, this is wrong. You want to think of things scientifically. Why did they do what they did? What was the result of them doing what they did? And think of it that way.
All right. So we've got a lot of people asking about this. I'm sure I'll butcher this name because, as I say, I don't speak Commie. What do you think of Rhea Dunayevskaya? You know what that roughly is?
Yeah, I'm not a fan. That's the new left. That's Marxist humanism. That's that's getting into existentialism and getting into that's the kind of stuff that the CIA pushed. The synthetic left. This left that's anti-Soviet. I mean, that's I'm in a different category as someone who's labeled a tanky, someone who has admiration for the Soviet Union and China and such. I'm in a completely different category. I view that as new left.
Is it critical for someone who's a communist or a socialist to read theory?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. There's a long tradition of this, and if you don't know what happened before, you can't apply it. I think we should study. But the difference that I have is that a lot of the people who do read theory, they want to be a Trotskyist or a Stalinist or a Hoxhaist or a Maoist. I don't think you should be any kind of ist. I think you should study all of it, but blindly adhere to none of it. Right? I study anarchism. I study Trotskyism. I study social democracy. I study Mao. I study Stalin. I study Enver Hoxha. I study Ho Chi Minh, but I don't blindly adhere to any of it. And that's what people should do. They should wrangle with these big questions, study socialist leaders of the past, but there's no reason to adopt it as your new faith. You should read it scientifically.
All right. And Mike wants to know, do you own Bitcoin?
No.
Do you have any thoughts on Bitcoin?
Nope.
All right. Let's see here. Silent Liberal Tory wants to know, what are your opinions on the British national healthcare system?
I mean, it's underfunded. It's having problems, but right now the free market extremist elements are trying to completely dismantle it, and that would make things a lot worse. And that it came into existence because of the Soviet Union. If it were not for the Soviet Union and the class struggle that existed throughout Europe, and as a result of the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union's example of building a national healthcare system over there, the capitalists of Britain would never have been in a situation where they allowed it to come into existence. It came into existence as a result of socialism. Free market capitalism is now trying to dismantle it.
Okay. And we've had multiple questions about this, roughly. Sybin phrases it, do you believe the friction between the U.S. and China will result in war?
I really hope not. And I believe it won't, because I believe, let me just put it this blatantly, right? This is not going to win me any points, but I'm sorry, but a war with China, they would kick our ass. Okay. And I think that the leaders of this country know that. It wouldn't be desirable. Millions of people would die. I mean, that would be more like that would be like an Armageddon, Mad Max kind of situation. And they would win, on top of all of it. So I don't see how any of that would be desirable. And I think that they're trying to scapegoat China now for the pandemic. There may be more proxy wars around the world, but I don't think our leaders are stupid enough to try to have a full-on confrontation with China. And I think that there will be more polarization. Our leaders are going to try to suppress China more, blame China more, scapegoat China more, but there's not going to be a full-on direct confrontation, because that would be Armageddon. That would be World War III, and that's not something that we're prepared for. And honestly, I will say, think about people our age. I'm a millennial. Think about millennials, Generation Z. I mean, do you really see those folks putting on uniforms and being airdropped into China come on now. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry, but I think great wars of the generations past are a little bit passe for the United States in our time. I just don't see culturally. I just don't see us doing that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, we're happy to have other people do it for us, like proxies, but we're kind of like the Roman Empire at this point. We can't fight our own wars. I don't see us raising an army among our population and sending them to have a big confrontation with another powerful country.
And Suggest wants to know, obviously we talked about different labels that have been applied to you, and you've accepted socialist, communist, Marxist, Leninist. Which label do you prefer?
I call myself a 21st century socialist.
All right. So, I mean, we're at 2 hours here. So for everyone here, sorry we couldn't get all your questions. I noticed in near the end there were 10 questions in less than 60 seconds. Can't get through all of these. Really appreciate you coming on here. Love to have you on again in the future. Everyone, make sure you do check out Caleb's Discord. It's posted in the Ping Partners channel. Check out his YouTube. Like I said, he's less than 20 away from getting 10,000. Let's help him get there. And also, I'm curious here. We've had debates before. I didn't really know much what's going on with this, but I saw a little bit of the thing with Vosh. And I went ahead and asked him, because we've actually hosted a bunch of debates here. Vosh has, I think, been here 3 times. Stefan Molyneux's been here 3 times. Vosh said that, he's really interested only in having that on his own channel, which is his choice. But would you be interested in having a debate here with someone else, perhaps a capitalist?
Sure.
All right. So I'll reach out and find something. I'm sure we can find something in short order and get back to you on that.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah. Have me on anytime. We're all sitting at home Corona streaming. I may not have as much time when I'm, back at work every day, but yeah, I love these engagements. I've had a great time here. Great questions.
Yeah. And once again, I really appreciate it. So guys, let's see. So, sorry, man. Yeah, again, thanks. Really appreciate it. And look forward to having you on again in the future.
Sure thing. My pleasure.
All right.
There's where